rations before we moved in vehicle convoy up to the hills between East and West Timor on the border. This is where the militia were most active, and our unit was tasked to provide security along the border villages. We encountered so many acts of desperation that I've never witnessed before. We dug a large pit around the size of a basketball court where we used to burn all of our rubbish. It wasn't long before we had to provide security at the rubbish pit, as the locals would run into the fire and grab a burning bag of rubbish in hope of getting some food or a souvenir from Australia. Our unit established good relationships with the locals. We built a high level of trust throughout our deployment, which was evident during a patrol through a local village. Our sections would patrol through one particular village on a regular basis, chatting to the locals, giving the kids some lollies, and gathering intelligence at the same time. On one patrol, the village was empty, which was a red flag to the patrol members. It wasn't quite right. The section commander decided to sleep the section in a small concrete building that night instead of out in the open, and also post extra sentries. Later that night, the section was attacked with grenades. Luckily, we had no casualties as the section was protected by the safety of the concrete building. We thank the locals who let us know the danger by making themselves scarce. Between patrols, I spent time with the locals in the town of Ballabo. One of our achievements during our deployment was that a small school in Ballabo was able to open due to our presence and the increase in security. In my downtime, I spent time teaching basic English to the locals. If only my teachers at Gorican High could see me now. In our 6 months, we managed to secure the border villages, rebuild some of the structures, and provide some form of normality for the locals. I've had mates killed during training and on deployments who all had the same common goal of restoring peace and these guys will be forever remembered. My time in the military has given me values of loyalty, selflessness. I'm proud of my career and achievements, but mostly traditions of the Australian Defence Force. Thanks for your time today, and hopefully you get to show your respect to an old digger this Sunday. It means a lot that they have your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for sharing your story with us. I would now like to introduce Alida Joseph. Alida is a member of the Year 12 Modern History class and will deliver the commemorative address.
On Anzac Day, we remember and honour the service and sacrifice of those who have served our nation. We do this for a number of reasons: to acknowledge those who have died in service to our nation, to reflect on how that service and sacrifice has contributed to what and who we are as a nation today. That is, to understand its impact, and to understand what our response should be to that legacy. On the 25th of April 1915, the world changed. As young men and women of that generation joined the services in increasingly large numbers, our nation experienced loss at a disproportionately larger rate than other countries. Australia suffered the highest death and wounding rate per capita. This loss devastated our cities and towns. It disrupted the social fabric of Australia. But from that devastation grew an Australian identity that had guided and in many respects defined our national character. And in more recent decades, our service and sacrifice has continued in operations around the globe. Each has had its impact on our returned servicemen and servicewomen and remind us that our duty to our veterans never ceases. We now talk of the Anzac legacy as having 4 characteristics that define Australia: mateship, endurance, courage, and sacrifice. Today, the Anzac legacy should serve 3 purposes: to call on us to thank those earlier generations for their sacrifice, to energise us in looking after our more recent veterans, and to inform us of what those earlier generations would expect of us today as we face our own generational test. We remember on Anzac Day for a reason. We are proud of our Anzac forebearers. Let us make them proud of us.
Thank you, Alida. I would now like to call on Jonathan McCann and Zane Dennis to lead us in reading the ode.
The ode is a part of a poem written by Lawrence Binion in 1914. He wrote this poem after watching his mates struggling to cope with the devastation and death during the war. Much of his reflection is based around his consideration of what sacrifice in life in war time meant. In a moment, I will ask you to stand and face the screens. The last post will then be played. The last post is the call which signals the end of the day for soldiers. Over time, it has become part of military funerals as a way of saying a final farewell. After the playing of the last post, I ask you to stand in silent reflection for 1 minute. In particular, we should consider the service of those connected to the McKillop community. At the conclusion of the minute's silence, you will hear the rouse. The flag will then be raised to the top of the post. This is to signify the period of mourning is over and life and duty continue. Please stand.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
please be seated to lay our wreath. Whilst they do so, Mr. Wallace and Holly will be singing.
I will be queen